If you've ever built an events feature into your website, you've probably encountered the need for recurring events generation. Now, unfortunately, WebFlow does not offer any support for this kind of feature. However, it is possible if you've created a CMS collection for your events, it's possible to use the API and some external application to generate those events for you. Now, I encountered this need recently with a website that I was building for a client, and as you can see here, very simple events, information, location details, event type details, city description, and so on. And each of these events have full pages. They are generated and built and published through the CMS. And what I needed was the ability to generate these automatically as recurring events. Now, the mechanism that I've used relies on a system you may be familiar with called Zapier, which is a third-party online software as a service platform which connects different systems together. And what I'm going to do is walk through the implementation that I did in a rough and simple high-level way, show you some of the working mechanisms so that you may be able to build something suitable for your own needs. I found this quite useful and very flexible as well. So let's recap the use case and the needs requirements that I had. I've got a CMS collection table with events, and I need to create upcoming events roughly 4 weeks or so before they occur. So what I'm looking to do is to automatically generate events that are recurring coming up in roughly a month's time. Now, to make this work, it really helps to have a very consistent schedule. If I've got an event every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. ongoing, that's exactly the type of consistency we're looking for. That keeps things very easy in the way that Zapier and Google Calendar are currently designed to integrate. I've used Google Calendar as my trigger. Now let me show you how this works. If you have a look at my website design here, you can see I've got some collections, and under here I've got events. A typical event, it's got its name. For internal purposes, it's got its own title, brief description, the date and time of its creation, and then I've also got it linked to cross-reference tables for the venue and for the type of event. And there will be others as well, the city that it's in, the chapter, and so on, which will be part of venue. So everything is linked together, and the publishing then becomes pretty tightly controlled. You can ignore start date hack, that's no longer in use. So what I'm needing to do is to automatically generate records into this table. Now, in order to do that, what I did was I mapped out the events that I want automatically published. Now, this is vastly simplified for this demonstration, but I've got a Google Calendar here which has a recurring event on the calendar, and this event, as we hit it, it will trigger a Zapier zap and run some code which will then create an event. And the design that I'm going for here is have the event do the trigger, and whenever it gets hit, generate an event that is plus 28 days from the details of this event. Now, if you know anything about the WebFlow API, and if you've ever worked with it, one of the things that you've probably become aware of is that when you have cross-reference fields, you need to know the IDs of the thing of the things you're selecting in those fields, which are not really exposed anywhere through the WebFlow interface. So finding those is a little bit of a challenge, and it can be done again through the API. And I've built a simple tool that allows me to navigate through my CMS collections and extract those IDs exactly for that purpose, just to be able to snoop in there and understand what number it is that I'm looking for. If you have questions about that, just message me and I'll fill you in on the details. And I may actually publish that tool at some time as well. However, what I'm needing to do to make this work is I'm needing to get those IDs and then attach them to the event so that the venue and the event type and those types of details can be filled in and can be variable with the event. Now, Google Calendar does not offer a means to store additional metadata. However, it does have a description field. So we've gotten a little bit creative here and use that description field for a chunk of JSON data. Now you can see what I've done here is just basically text data in a particular JSON format. I need to have a collection here called data. And in there I've got 3 particular items which I have chosen the names and values for. And I've got a few things. I need my venue CMS ID, which looks like this. I need my event type CMS ID, which looks like this. And I need a venue name for display purposes. And this has gone through several iterations, so I may not actually be using all of those. But essentially what I do is I create the event and I paste in this chunk of JSON information, which is then going to be picked up by Zapier when the trigger goes off. I then extract and parse that data, and I'm then able to access those values for use in my Zap. And that becomes the sort of trick of it. Now I can create as many events as I want on any schedule I want. I get full use of Google Calendar's recurring events capabilities. If I want it every Tuesday and every Thursday at 6:30 p.m., I can do that, which is very helpful. If I want it the first Tuesday of every month, I can do that. Google Calendar is quite good at that. So I use Google Calendar for that purpose. And when the event goes off, it causes a triggering event for this particular Zap, which we're going to have a look at now. So I've got the trigger event start, which is tied to the Google Calendar. And basically it just executes whenever an event starts on this particular Google Calendar. Once that happens, I need to parse that description field and turn it into JSON. And this got a little creative. I had to run a piece of script. And the script that I came up with, again, message me if you need any help. I've got my input data, which I've called data, which means it's going to extract this chunk from the data, these 3 items. And I've got a piece of code which does a JSON.parse on input data.data, gets an object and returns the object. That's all it does. It's very simplistic, but it ends up being quite useful because what happens at that point is that all of the data items I put in there essentially become kind of like global variables that I get to use from this point forward in my Zap. At the next point, I actually need to get the event start date, and I need to get it in New Zealand time, so I need to make some modifications to it from whatever time zone it's currently in, probably UTC. And then I need to calculate when the new event date time is going to be, so I'm adding 4 weeks to it. And I'm doing all these things separately, partly because it just simplifies the ability to track and monitor and debug what's going on. I'm basically doing a plus 28 days, and I need it in a particular format for WebFlow. So I calculate the new event date time, then I need to convert that to New Zealand time. In my particular case, you'll need to convert it to your time zone, wherever that is. And this is actually something that you can do in a number of different ways as well. Programmatically, if you knew that you want to add, for example, plus 10, GMT plus 10, then you would be able to do that by specifying a plus 10 data field in your event if you wanted to get a little bit fancier. Now at this point I'm actually creating a record in Airtable for a different purpose because I generate I need an iCal feed that people can subscribe to, so I do that through Airtable. And at the same time I need a new CMS item created in WebFlow, which looks basically like this. Brojo events table, put in the title, the start date, the venue details, which have come from my parsed data, my JSON data, and the event type as well. Both of those fields are getting pulled in, so they can be different for different events, right? It's a very important thing. Any other variables and fields that I want. The name, in this case, I want it to be the name of the event as I've named it in Google Calendar, but I also want the date in a tidy human readable format. So I want the day of the month, and then a 3-letter month name, and then a 4-digit year just for attractiveness. So I had to create that formatted version, and I use that in step 6, where I'm doing the date formatting. And anything else I want to put in, of course, I want it published immediately, so I said archived and draft to no. This is pretty much the process that's going on now. What happens is every time I pass that event trigger, fires the Zap takes that data, parses the JSON, calculates out +4 weeks, formats the dates for the different purposes, both display purposes and for the API as well, using a standard web date format. And at that point, I then create an Airtable version of the event, and I create the WebFlow version of the event, and we are good to go. Everything is automatically created. From there, you can, of course, go in and make additional modifications if you want, but this is a very convenient way, I've found, to just make certain that events are published for you automatically, and you don't have to jump in on a weekly reminder to go in and publish new events in a manual sense. So I hope this has been useful to you, and if you've got any questions, message me.